Why did no one notice her hand shaking under the table? The briefing room was cold. Too cold. The kind of cold that made the metal chairs bite at the back of her legs. She sat straight, boots together, trying not to let the tremor travel past her fingers. The others, the older ones, the ones who'd done this a dozen times, looked calm, even bored. The colonel's voice was a low, steady hum. Maps glowed on the screen behind him. Coordinates, weather reports, contingencies. It was all standard except for the part that was. She felt the folded paper in her pocket. Orders. Simple, clear, impersonal. But there was another command, older, sharper, carved somewhere she couldn't pull it out from. No one here knew about that. She swallowed hard and made herself look up. The colonel's eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on her, just long enough to remind her she was still the newest face at the table. "This isn't a rescue," he said finally. "It's an extraction." The room went still. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop its rattle. She nodded along with the others, but her throat had gone dry. Extraction meant speed. Extraction meant violence. Extraction meant no time for questions or hesitation. She thought of the face from the file. The man they were supposed to bring out. A man who'd made enemies in every place you could make them. A man she had only ever seen in a grainy photograph. And yet she cared more than she wanted to admit. When the briefing ended, the others got up slowly, stretching, muttering about gear checks. She stayed seated a moment longer, letting the paper in her pocket press into her thigh. No one had asked her why she volunteered for this mission. Maybe no one cared. Outside, the air was dry, harsh. Sand gusted against the hangar doors. She stood still until the wind stung her cheeks awake, until she could breathe again. "First op nerves." The voice was soft, coming from behind her. She turned and found Diaz standing there, helmet tucked under one arm, a lopsided grin on his face. "Something like that," she said. He nodded as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just keep your head down and follow the plan. Plans keep you alive." "Plans?" She forced a small smile. "Right." But there was something she hadn't told him. Not him, not anyone. When she finally walked toward the plane, the night had already begun to swallow the horizon. The transport's belly glowed faintly with light. The engines were silent for now, but even at rest, the aircraft felt alive, like a waiting animal. She climbed inside and found her seat. The others moved with quiet efficiency, loading gear, checking weapons. No one spoke unless they had to. The flight was long, the kind of long where every minute was heavy. The drone of the engines filled her skull until it felt like her thoughts had to shout to be heard. She stared at her gloves, flexing her hands, over and over until her knuckles ached. She thought about the letter again, not the orders, the other one. The one she'd written weeks ago and still hadn't mailed. She mouthed the words now silently, "I'm sorry." Diaz sat across from her, head back against the bulkhead, eyes closed. He looked like he was sleeping, but she knew he was. No one ever really slept before a drop. When the red light finally came on, the plane seemed to exhale. Helmets went on, straps tightened. Someone made a joke that no one laughed at. She checked her rifle twice, then a third time. When the ramp opened, the night roared in, hot and loud, smelling of dust and engine oil. She stepped into it anyway. The landing zone was quiet, too quiet. She felt every nerve sharpen as they moved out, boots crunching softly on dry ground. Their radios stayed mostly silent, clipped commands, updates, nothing more. The stars above were painfully bright, as if mocking how small they were down here. When they reached the compound, she could hear her pulse in her ears. Diaz gave her a quick glance. It was almost a question, "You ready?" She nodded before she could think. The breach was quick, faster than she expected. Shouts splintering wood, the sharp, ringing crack of a door kicked open. She moved with the team, heart hammering, rifle up. A figure stumbled into view, thin, disoriented, blinking against the sudden light. Their target. It should have been simple from there. Grab him, get out, call it done. But he looked at her, not the others, just her. And for a split second, she thought he knew. They bound his hands, pushed him toward the exit. She followed, breathing hard, keeping her eyes on his back. Something about the way he moved, calm, almost resigned, made the hairs on her neck stand up. Outside, the desert felt even darker than before. The extraction point wasn't far. Just a few more minutes, she told herself. Just a few more minutes and we're gone. But the night had other plans. The first shot came from the ridge, a single, sharp crack that lit the air with terror. Then came the rest. Chaos. Voices shouting, radios screaming, muzzle flashes strobing the night. She hit the dirt, rolled behind a half-collapsed wall. Contact northeast. Diaz's voice somewhere close. Her hands moved without asking her permission, rifle up, breath steady, return fire. But the sound of the man's voice, the one they'd come for, cut through it all. He was shouting something. She couldn't hear the words over the gunfire, but the tone was urgent, desperate. And it was aimed at her. She ducked lower, heart racing, a question rising in her chest like smoke. Why her? Why did he look at her like he'd been expecting this moment all along? The firefight stretched time into something unrecognizable. She fired until the magazine was empty, then reloaded by feel. Somewhere behind her, someone screamed. The night swallowed it whole. When it was over, when the last shot cracked and the silence fell so suddenly, it felt unreal. She realized she was still gripping the rifle so hard her hands hurt. She looked around. The team was regrouping, counting heads. One was missing. Diaz. Her stomach lurched. They found him a few minutes later, half hidden by the wall, alive but barely. Blood soaked the dirt under him. The medic worked fast, hands moving with grim precision. "We need to move now," someone said. "Bird on the way." They lifted Diaz onto the stretcher. She should have felt relief that he was breathing. Instead, she felt something heavier settle in her chest. The man they'd come for was still watching her. Even now. Even as they dragged him toward the evac point. And she couldn't shake the thought that maybe this wasn't the mission she thought it was. Maybe it never had been. How do you keep moving when every step feels heavier than the last? The night air felt thicker now, full of dust and smoke. She stayed close to the stretcher, one hand on the frame as if her grip alone could keep Diaz tethered to the earth. The evac point was lit only by the faint strobe of the approaching bird. The thump-thump-thump of its blades grew louder, drowning out thought, turning everything into motion and instinct. The man they were extracting walked without resisting, his hands still bound, head slightly lowered. No fear in his face, just something else, something unreadable. She caught herself staring again. "Keep moving," someone shouted over the rotor wash. The wind whipped at her face as they loaded Diaz first, the medic climbing in after him. When she turned to help load the prisoner, he looked at her again. Not like a man being rescued. Not like a man being saved. More like a man taking measure of someone he'd been waiting to meet. Her chest tightened. She stepped back as the others shoved him inside. She climbed in last, sitting across from him, knees almost touching. The flight back felt longer than the flight in. The aircraft rocked in the turbulence, the smell of blood and sweat hanging heavy. Diaz was pale, barely conscious, murmuring something that the medic bent low to catch. The prisoner, no, the asset, as command would call him, sat still, eyes fixed on her. She wanted to look away, she couldn't. Finally, over the noise of the engines, he spoke. "You don't know yet, do you?" The words were soft, swallowed quickly by the roar, but they landed sharp. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to ask what he meant, But the medic barked something urgent, and everyone's attention snapped to Diaz. She leaned forward instinctively until she saw him open his eyes. He looked at her just for a second, then he smiled, tired, faint but real. And somehow, that hurt worse than if he hadn't looked at all. When they landed back at base, the night had given way to the first gray edge of morning. The team moved fast, helping unload Diaz, getting him to medics. The prisoner was escorted out by 2 guards. But not before he looked back at her once more. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, just loud enough for her to hear. Then he was gone. She stood there long after the others had scattered. The sun was rising, casting long, harsh shadows across the tarmac. The folded paper in her pocket suddenly felt heavier. In the debrief, no one asked her for details beyond her role. No one asked why she hesitated once, just long enough for Diaz to get hit. No one asked why her hands wouldn't stop trembling when she set her rifle down. She answered the questions mechanically, her voice calm. When it was over, she walked out into the sunlight, blinking hard. The base was already waking up, engines starting, soldiers moving, distant voices on radios. But it all felt far away. She found herself heading toward the medical wing without deciding to. Diaz was in recovery. The nurse told her he'd live, though it would be weeks before he was back on his feet. He was awake when she stepped in. "Hey," he said softly, voice rough. She tried to smile. "You scared us back there." "Scared me too," he said, and gave a small, weak laugh. For a moment the tension broke. But then he looked at her more seriously. "You froze," he said quietly. The words hit harder than she expected. She swallowed. "I didn't." "You did," he said. "For just a second you looked at him and you froze." She felt heat rising in her face. "I'm sorry," she said. Diaz studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm not saying this to blame you," he said. I've been out there with people who freeze. They usually don't come back." She had no answer for that. When she left the med wing, the air felt heavier again. She made her way back to the barracks, sat down on the edge of her bunk, and finally pulled the paper from her pocket. Her orders. She stared at the words. The language was clean, detached. Bring the asset to base. Deliver to command. Maintain chain of custody. But it was the last line that made her stomach twist. Authorized to use lethal force if asset resists. She crushed the paper in her fist until it crumpled. Then she reached for the other letter, the one she hadn't mailed. The one addressed to someone she hadn't seen in years. She read the first line again. "I forgive you." Her throat tightened. She shoved it back into the bottom of her pack. There was a knock at the door. When she opened it, a young lieutenant stood there, clipboard in hand. "Command wants you," he said. Her pulse spiked. "For what?" "Debrief continuation," he said. But his eyes flicked away when he said it. Something told her this wasn't just another debrief. She followed him through the base, heart thudding in her chest, until they reached a door she hadn't been through before. When it opened, the first thing she saw was the prisoner. Sitting calm, hands unbound now. And smiling at her. Why was he smiling? The room was small, windowless. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a faint hum from the overhead light. She froze in the doorway, pulse loud in her ears. "Sit," the officer at the table said. Her boots felt too heavy as she crossed the room. The prisoner watched her the entire time, eyes calm, almost curious. When she finally sat, the metal chair was cold against her back. The officer began with the usual questions: name, affiliation, chain of events from the moment they breached the compound. She answered mechanically, keeping her voice even. But she could feel the man across from her studying every word. When the officer was done, he gathered his notes, nodded, and left, leaving her alone. With him. The silence was so complete, she could hear the buzz of the light above them. "You don't know who I am," the man said finally. His voice was quiet, unhurried. She stayed still. "I know enough." He tilted his head as though amused. "No," he said, "you know what they told you. That's not the same thing." Her jaw tightened. "Then tell me." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "First, tell me something," he said. "Why are you really here?" The question hit harder than she expected. Her throat felt dry. "I'm here because I was assigned," she said, a little too quickly. He smiled faintly. "That's what you tell them," he said, "but you know better. There's a reason you volunteered for this op." She didn't answer. His eyes softened slightly. "You think I do know why," he said. "You think I don't know who you are." Her pulse spiked. He leaned back in his chair, as if giving her space. "I knew your father," he said. The words landed like a punch. She felt her hands go cold. He watched her carefully now, his expression unreadable. "He was a good man," the prisoner said. "A stubborn man. He died for what he believed in." Her chest felt too tight. She had spent years keeping that part of her life locked away, the part where her father's name was a whisper, a footnote in classified files. "What do you know about him?" she asked, her voice low. "More than they ever told you," he said. The door opened before she could ask more. A guard stepped in. "Time up." The man didn't protest. He stood, hands loose at his sides, and let himself be led away. But as he passed her, he said softly, "They lied to you." And then he was gone. She sat there long after the door closed, her hands gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles hurt. When she finally stood, her legs felt shaky. Outside, the corridor seemed too bright. The lieutenant was waiting. "You're cleared," he said, as if that was supposed to mean something. She nodded, walking past him, heart still pounding. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She tried to throw herself into routine, gear checks, paperwork, even cleaning her weapon, but her thoughts kept circling back. Her father. Her father, who had died under circumstances no one had ever fully explained. Her father, who she'd been told had made a mistake. Now this man, this stranger, was telling her it wasn't a mistake at all. When night fell, she found herself outside the hangar again. The desert wind was sharp, carrying the smell of oil and sand. Diaz would still be in recovery. The rest of the team would be sleeping. She was alone. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself remember. Her father's voice, low, patient, teaching her to steady her breath before squeezing a trigger. Her father's hands scarred, strong, showing her how to field strip a rifle by feel in the dark. The last time she saw him, his uniform still dusty from the field, his smile tired but warm. Then the knock on the door weeks later, the folded flag, the words that didn't match the man she remembered. Training accident, they had called it. But something about the way the officer had looked at the floor when he said it had never left her. Now, years later, that unease was back, sharper than ever. She turned away from the hangar and started walking. Her boots crunched softly in the dirt, the night sky vast above her. Somewhere in the distance, a generator hummed. She didn't know where she was going until she found herself outside the detention wing. The guards at the entrance looked up in surprise. "Command clearance," she said, her voice steady. They hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in, the halls dimly lit, until she reached the cell where they were holding him. He was sitting on the bench, calm as ever, as if he'd known she was coming. "You want answers," he said quietly. She didn't speak. "You deserve them," he said. For a long moment she just stood there, staring through the bars. Then she took a step closer. "Tell me everything," she said. "How much truth can a person take before it breaks them?" He didn't answer immediately. just studied her, as if weighing whether she was ready. "You think your father died in a training accident," he said at last. The words were a scalpel, slicing clean through the air. She felt her throat tighten. "That's what I was told." He nodded slowly. "That's what they told everyone, easier that way." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "What happened?" she asked. He leaned back slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "He didn't die by mistake," he said. "He died because he refused an order." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. "That's not possible," she said, her voice sharp. "Isn't it?" he asked softly. Her chest ached. Her father disobeying an order. The man who had drilled discipline into her bones, who believed in duty above all else. "You're lying," she said, but the words lacked force. He shook his head. "Your father found out something he wasn't supposed to," he said. "About me, about the operation they were running. He wouldn't go along with it, and they silenced him." Her pulse was loud in her ears now. "You expect me to believe that?" He stood slowly, stepping closer to the bars. "I expect you to ask yourself why you've always doubted the story they gave you," he said. "Why you never stopped looking for answers." Her breath caught. Because it was true, she hadn't stopped. Every deployment, every mission, every extra shift she volunteered for. All of it was a way to stay close enough to the truth that maybe, one day, she'd catch a glimpse of it. Now here it was, standing in front of her. Her legs felt shaky. She gripped the bars hard. "What was the operation?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "An off-the-books rendition. I was the target. Your father was supposed to take me in or take me out. He refused, said I wasn't who they said I was, and he was right." Her heart pounded. "If you're right," she said, "why bring you back here now? Why risk it?" He smiled faintly. "Because they need me again," he said. "Or rather, they need what I know." The thought sent a chill down her spine. "You have a choice to make," he said. Her grip on the bars tightened. "What choice?" "You can keep following their orders," he said, "or you can follow the truth, but you can't do both." His words hung in the air, heavy as stone. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. A guard appeared, time up. She didn't move. "Ma'am," the guard said more firmly. She forced herself to step back. The man watched her go, his eyes calm. But before the guard could close the door, he said, "You're more like him than you think." The words followed her all the way back to her quarters. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it came in jagged pieces, flashes of memory, her father's face, his voice telling her to trust her gut, not just the chain of command. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, sweat cooling on her skin. The base was quiet at this hour, the sky just beginning to pale. She got dressed slowly, her movements deliberate, her mind racing. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, she found herself walking toward the medical wing again. Diaz was awake, propped up in bed, watching the news on the small TV in the corner. He looked over when she stepped in. "You look worse than me," he said. She tried to smile, but it didn't hold. "I talked to him," she said quietly. Diaz frowned. "The asset." She nodded. "And—" She hesitated. "He says my father was killed for refusing an order," she said finally. Diaz was silent for a long moment. "You believe him?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Part of her did believe him. Diaz sighed. "You need to be careful," he said. "Command doesn't like questions, not about things that are already buried." She looked at him, searching his face. "You think I should just let it go?" Diaz's jaw tightened. "I think you should decide if this is worth burning your career for," he said. She nodded slowly, then stood. Outside, the day had fully broken. Engines rumbled, the base alive again. She made her way to the hangar. Her rifle was waiting, clean and ready. Her orders were still crumpled on the desk. She smoothed them out, staring at the words. Authorized to use lethal force if asset resists. She folded the paper again, smaller this time, and tucked it back into her pocket. Then she sat down, head in her hands. She had a choice to make. And the clock was running out. How do you follow orders when every word feels like a knife? She stood in the operations office, the blinds half-drawn, morning light cutting the room into stripes. The major slid a new folder across the desk toward her. "Direct from command," he said. Her fingers hesitated before picking it up. The paper felt heavier than it should. Inside, a short list of instructions, clear, final. The prisoner was to be transferred tonight. Destination classified. Escort team required. She was listed as part of that team. The major didn't look up from his own paperwork. "You'll leave at 2200. Until then, rest up. You look like hell." She nodded mechanically, but her chest felt tight. Transferred. She knew what that really meant. No one ever saw the people who were transferred to undisclosed locations. Not alive, anyway. Her father's voice came back to her, unbidden. "Don't ignore what you know in your gut." Her gut was screaming now. She left the office and walked out into the blinding sun. The base was busy. Soldiers moving in every direction, vehicles starting up, radios crackling with routine chatter. But it all sounded far away. She found herself back outside the detention wing, staring at the door. She shouldn't go in. She should follow the plan. Plans keep you alive. But her feet moved anyway. The guard frowned when he saw her, back again. "Command clearance," she said, showing the paperwork from yesterday. He hesitated, then nodded. When she stepped into the dim hallway, her pulse was already hammering. He was sitting in the same spot, calm as ever, as though he'd been expecting her. "You came back," he said softly. "They're transferring you tonight," she said, cutting straight to it. He studied her face. "And you think that's the end of it?" Her throat felt dry. "Isn't it?" she asked. His gaze didn't waver. "No," he said. "It's the end of me, not the end of what I know." She stepped closer to the bars, lowering her voice. "If what you're saying is true," she said, "why haven't you told them everything? Why not just talk?" He smiled faintly. "Because the people in that room aren't the ones who can fix this," he said. "But you might be." Her chest tightened. "You knew my father," she said quietly. "Yes," he said, "and he trusted me. I think he'd want me to trust you." The words hit harder than she expected. "I don't even know if I trust myself right now," she said, almost to herself. "Then trust him," the prisoner said. "Trust what he taught you." She stayed there for a long moment, gripping the bars, her breath unsteady. Footsteps echoed down the hall. A guard appeared. "Ma'am, visiting hours are over." She stepped back reluctantly, but not before the man said one last thing. "If you do nothing, they'll kill me tonight, and the truth dies with me." The words followed her all the way back to the barracks. She sat on her bunk, staring at the floor until the room blurred. Her orders sat on the desk, folded neatly. She opened them again. Transferred to undisclosed location. Her stomach churned. Diaz's words came back to her. Command doesn't like questions. If she interfered, if she disobeyed, it wouldn't just end her career. It could end her freedom. Or her life. But if she stayed silent, she'd be complicit. The sun dipped lower, turning the desert outside gold, then red. When the time came, she put on her gear with practiced hands. Every strap, every buckle, every magazine check felt ritualistic, heavy. She walked to the motor pool, where the rest of the escort team was already waiting. They nodded at her, casual, unaware of the storm raging behind her calm face. The prisoner was brought out in restraints, still calm, still silent. She climbed into the vehicle opposite him. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but something in his gaze said, "This is it. Whatever you do next, it matters." The convoy rolled out, engines low and steady, night closing in around them. The desert wind howled across the flat ground, throwing sand against the windows. The radio crackled with routine updates. But she barely heard them. Her fingers tightened on her rifle. Her orders burned in her pocket like a live coal. Somewhere out there, the road would fork, literally and figuratively. She would have to choose. Obey or act. And she was running out of time. How do you know when you've crossed the line? The convoy moved steadily through the night, tires crunching over hard-packed dirt. The sky above was a sweep of stars, cold and endless. She sat rigid, rifle across her lap, every muscle tight. The prisoner sat across from her, hands bound, his face calm but watchful. Every few minutes, the radio crackled with status reports from the lead vehicle. She stared out the window, the desert a blur. Somewhere out there, the truth waited. But so did the end of everything she'd worked for. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. One day you'll have to choose between what's right and what's easy. Headlights cut across the road ahead. The lead vehicle slowed, signaling a checkpoint. She felt her pulse spike. If they cleared this checkpoint, there'd be no turning back. She glanced at the prisoner. He met her eyes steady. "You still have time," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the engine noise. Her grip on the rifle tightened. The vehicle ahead stopped. Voices murmured over the radio. She could hear the guards outside speaking with the soldiers at the checkpoint, though the words were lost in the wind. The prisoner leaned forward slightly. "If you're going to act," he said, "it has to be now." Her breath caught. "Shut up," one of the other soldiers growled. But her heart was pounding too loud to hear anything else. Her mind ran through the plan, the timing, the distance to the next turn, the position of every man in the vehicle. Her whole body felt coiled, electric. Then the lead vehicle rolled forward, the checkpoint cleared. Their truck lurched back into motion. And she made her choice. She moved fast, faster than she thought she could. Her rifle came up, not at the prisoner but at the guard nearest him. "Don't move," she said, her voice steady but cold. The guard froze, shocked. The driver swore, slamming on the brakes. "What the hell are you doing?" someone shouted. She kept the rifle leveled, her voice sharp. "Uncuff him now." The prisoner stayed still, eyes on her. "You're out of your mind," the guard said. "Do it," she said, finger tight on the trigger. The silence stretched heavy, until finally the guard swore and fumbled for the key. The cuffs came off. "Get out," she said, motioning to the door. The prisoner moved first, fast but controlled, dropping to the dirt. She backed toward the door, rifle still up. The driver reached for the radio. She shot it, sparks flew. Then she was out in the night, the desert air cold against her face. The prisoner was already moving toward the dark ridge nearby. "Come on," he said. She followed, boots pounding against the dirt, her breath loud in her ears. Shouts erupted behind them, the other soldiers spilling out of the vehicle. "Stop, stop where you are." She didn't stop. The first shot cracked past her, close enough to make her flinch. The prisoner didn't slow. They ran for the ridge, scrambling up the rocky incline. Her lungs burned, every breath tearing at her chest. Another shot rang out, then another. She dropped low, using the rocks for cover, returning fire once, not to hit anyone, just to buy a few seconds. When they reached the top of the ridge, the view stretched wide, the desert glowing faintly under the moon, the convoy far below, soldiers scattering like ants. The prisoner turned to her. "You just made yourself a fugitive," he said. "I know," she said, breathing hard. He nodded once. "Then we need to keep moving." They dropped down the far side of the ridge, sliding on loose rock. The night swallowed them quickly, the shouts and engines growing fainter behind them. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline wearing thin. Her career was over. Her life as she'd known it was over. But there was no time to think about that. They had hours, maybe minutes, before command figured out which way they'd gone. She looked at the prisoner. "Where do we go?" He pointed toward the black line of mountains in the distance. "There," he said. "If we make it before dawn, we'll have a chance." She glanced back once, at the convoy lights now swarming like angry fireflies in the distance. Then she turned and started running again. How far can a person run before their past catches up? The desert was a black ocean under the stars. No roads. No lights. Just wind, dust, and the sound of their boots. Her breathing came ragged now, each inhale scraping her throat dry. The prisoner, no, she realized, she couldn't keep calling him that, moved with the rhythm of someone who had done this before. His steps were measured, conserving energy. "You're slowing down," he said without looking at her. "I'm fine," she lied. He didn't push it. They moved until the first edge of dawn bled into the sky, the stars beginning to fade. That was when they found the ruin. It wasn't much, just the crumbled bones of an old stone outpost, half buried in sand. But it offered shelter, and right now that was enough. She collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Sweat cooled quickly in the desert air, leaving her shivering. He crouched nearby, scanning the horizon. "They'll sweep this sector by sunrise," he said. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "You did the right thing back there," he added quietly. Her laugh was bitter, breathless. "Yeah, tell that to my career, to my team. You saved more than you think." She glanced at him sharp. "What do you know about what I think?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a small, battered notebook. He tossed it to her. She caught it, confused. "Open it." Inside were sketches, not maps, not intel, faces, names, dates. "Civilians," he said. "Every one of them executed under false intel. Your unit didn't know. They were following orders. I was there. I saw." Her stomach twisted. She flipped through page after page. And then she froze. The last drawing, a young man with tired eyes, a crooked smile. She knew that face. She had seen it every night for years, in memory and in grief. Her brother. Her hands shook as she traced the lines of the drawing. "You were there," she whispered. "Yes." "You saw what happened to him." "I tried to stop it," he said. "But your people had orders. They called it collateral damage. I called it murder." Her chest constricted. She had replayed that day in her mind so many times, imagining her brother's last moments, never knowing if he'd been scared or alone, or if anyone had even tried to help him. Now she knew. The desert was silent around them, broken only by the wind. She closed the notebook slowly. "This is why you were running," she said. He nodded. "This is why they wanted you gone," she added. "Yes. And now, this is why they'll never stop hunting us." He met her eyes steady. "You could still walk away," he said. "Go back, tell them I escaped, say I forced you to do it." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she tore the rank patch from her sleeve and dropped it into the sand. "I'm not going back." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he nodded once. "Then we move at first light." She sat there, her head resting back against the cold stone, watching the sky turn from gray to gold. Her brother's face still lingered in her mind, but for the first time in years, the memory didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a compass. How do you say goodbye to the person you used to be? The sun was a white fire above them by the time they reached the last stretch of valley. Heat shimmered off the rocks. Every step felt like dragging a weight behind her. The mountains loomed close now, jagged and sharp. Somewhere on the other side he had promised was safe ground. But safe was not what waited for them. The sound reached them first, the low thrum of rotors. She froze, hand on her rifle. "Chopper," she whispered. He scanned the sky. "They found us faster than I thought," he said. The helicopter came into view, small against the blue sky, circling like a vulture. "Keep moving," he said, his voice calm. They ran. The ground seemed endless, the heat pressing down like a hand. The chopper dipped lower. Then came the crack of rifles. Bullets spat dirt around them, sharp, angry bursts. They dove behind a rock outcrop, panting, pinned. "We won't make the ridge like this," she said. He checked the magazine on his weapon, then looked at her. "I can hold them off," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No. It's the only way. You get to the ridge. You tell the world what's in that notebook. You're not dying here." He smiled faintly. "You saved me once, let me do the same." Her throat tightened. Everything in her screamed against it, against losing someone else to the war that had already taken so much. But she saw it in his face, the resolve, the quiet acceptance. He had made his choice. And so had she. Together they rose, moving in sync, firing in short bursts, using the rocks for cover, advancing inch by inch toward the ridge. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't heroic, it was desperate, dirty, and loud. He was hit first, a sharp cry, then blood soaking his sleeve. She grabbed his vest and pulled him forward. "Move!" Another burst of fire drove them low again. They were close now, close enough to see the path winding up the ridge. But she knew he wouldn't make it. He knew it too. "Go," he said, breath ragged. "Now." She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "I'm not leaving you." He reached out, pressing the notebook into her hands. "You carry this, you carry the truth." The look in his eyes was steady. She held his gaze for one last beat, then she ran. The climb was brutal, her legs shaking, lungs burning. Bullets kicked up dust at her heels, but she didn't stop. At the top she dropped flat, pulling the rifle up, covering the path below. She saw him there, still fighting, still buying her time. Then the last shot rang out. And he was still. For a long time, there was only the wind. Her body shook from exhaustion, from rage, from grief. But she stayed there, silent, watching until the helicopter finally wheeled away, the soldiers pulling back. When the valley was empty again, she rose slowly. She opened the notebook. One last time, she looked at the faces inside, the civilians, her brother, every name and every line that had brought her here. Then she tore a strip from her undershirt, wrapped it around the notebook, and tied it tight. The ridge ahead led to freedom, but also to something heavier, the burden of truth, the cost of carrying it. She slipped the notebook into her pocket, the weight of it pressing against her heart. And then she walked, step by step, into the mountains, into whatever came next. Behind her, the desert was silent. Ahead of her, the wind carried no answers, only the steady whisper of her boots on stone. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And this time so did she.